The Navy released a new business operations plan in October that's designed to align with the National Defense Strategy. It features three main objectives: readiness, alliances, and operations reform. A department-wide audit will arm them with the data to make that happen. Here now, Mike Roberts, Director of the Navy's Development and Integration Program Executive Office for Integrated Warfare Systems, and Jake Freivald, Vice President of Information Builders. Thanks both very much for joining me. Mike, I want to start with you. Tell me how data plays into some of the major initiatives going on at the Navy right now. New business operations strategy is out, and a lot of other things where data is very important to you at the Navy.
Yeah, so over the last few years, the Navy's become very keen on data being a resource, using data as a resource and understanding the power of the data. So, as you know, the Navy is a very large organization. So we have undertaken looking at the data we have. So one thing we don't have is a lack of data. So we have a ton of data, trying to understand not only what to do with that data, it's more important, what is the authoritative sources of that data. So as you mentioned, the business plan that the DoD recently led, so that is big on, it maps directly to National Defense Strategy, mainly in the areas of speed and agility. So by changing the business system to look at those authoritative sources and understanding that data and mixing that with the mission side, you're able to make more agile decisions, but data-driven decisions. So that's a major undertaking that we've done, not only the Navy, but as you can see, the DoD as well.
So Jake, the Navy and the Defense Department are not the only organizations in the government that are seeking speed and agility and seeking to use data as the fuel for both of those. What can those organizations learn from maybe what the Navy's doing, what the military's doing, in order to have their own successes?
It's a great question. Every organization in the government has a lot of different data sources, as was mentioned before, as Mike just said. And one of the major issues is that we have to put out there in a transparent and accountable way what we're trying to do, what our current situation is and how we got there, and how our policies are going to drive us to some objective that we'd like to achieve. And in that sense, finding the authoritative data sources, being able to bring them together, because those things that I just said are all very different, right? The difference between your history and where you're trying to get to now are very different things. How do I bring those together in a way that lets people see, here's what we're trying to accomplish and here's how we're achieving that goal? And I need to add that you can't do this as a one-off. This is not a yearly planning process. Inside the military, you see people talk about decision cycles and things of that sort. You need to be able to bring this together now so that people who are on the ground, whatever that means to you, now are able to use the data that's available to them in a way that's going to make for better decisions. And I think all of that together is what's going to drive better operations and better processes in the government, military or not, from here on out.
What do you see as being different today from, say, 3 years ago or 5 years ago when it comes to the data being used to make decisions, and what do you see as the gains that are possible for people like Mike and others, especially in the military, but not exclusively necessarily, in another 3 to 5 years?
There's a lot to be said there. And I'm going to start with an analogy my dad made a long time ago, because you have to have that sometimes.
Of course.
He said that the difference with automobile adoption wasn't really about the assembly line, it was cheap gas. And in some sense, we're in the age of cheap gas as far as data goes. You've got bandwidth that goes everywhere. The cloud is ubiquitous. We've got computing power in so many places. Being able to take that computing power and harness it in a way that serves people who are not necessarily 5 people in a back room, but are able to serve your average warfighter, your average truck driver, your average person from the VA who's trying to help out a veteran. That's really a critical part of what's different, in that we can serve those people directly. And they're not the kind of people we used to think about serving with analytics. These are people who are just trying to do a job. How do we serve those people? That's changed a lot.
So my dad wasn't much for analogies, but he said you got to make hay while the sun shines all the time.
That's right.
And believe it or not, that seems to apply here, Mike, because one of the opportunities that you have is, I think, folks tend to gravitate toward the really sexy ways of using data, weapon systems, and all the stuff that goes bang a lot. But what Jake is talking about is equally applicable. You have internal customers that are using data to make things that would seem to be very back office, kind of mundane tasks as well, I imagine.
Yeah, so like we were talking about, it actually applies across the spectrum, from initiation of even the smallest system to the business side to the mission side. So using that same set of data or sets of data to make those decisions across the board are hugely important. And it's not only important to have the data, it's to have access to it. It's to have access across that decision-making spectrum at all times to that data, so that you can make decisions driven by the same core knowledge and understanding across those pieces. So.
One of the things that's really driven the data deluge in government is migration to the cloud. That's something that the Navy is undertaking. What do you see as the potential benefit to the migrations that you're undertaking in the Navy, or is it even too early to tell all the ways that it might benefit you?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a little early to tell, but really we're taking on the mission side of the cloud first. We're moving our integrated development environment to the cloud. What that means is, up to date to today, we mainly do development in stovepipe. So one program will be funded, one program will have requirements, they'll build it, and they'll build to an interface standard. Well, moving to the cloud allows us to do that building of those systems with real interfaces to real systems at real time, at all times across that spectrum. So by doing that, we're able to build systems faster, we're able to buy down the amount of testing we have to do, and in the end, what does that do? It speeds up delivery of capability to the fleet, and it also speeds up delivery of updates and new capability as those systems age over time. So we're using the cloud mainly in that area, but even further to that point, we're taking the cloud technology that industry has developed and kind of modernized and mainlined, and we're using that to transfer updates and capabilities to the ship in real time, whereas today we take years and years to do that same thing we can do in weeks or months now. So.
Jake, we have a couple of minutes left, so you get the last word. The wise thing that I heard that the Navy is doing there, here's the mission, here's how the cloud can enable the mission, here's how data can enable the mission, not vice versa, as we've seen some agencies do with some technologies over the years. What's the best way for an organization, regardless of military, civilian, whatever, to look at the mission and figure out, this is the data that I should look for, this is the way I want to analyze it, this is the way I want to apply the decision-making process?
I would say that the first thing to do is consider the people whom you're trying to serve. For some organizations, that's going to be the citizen. For some organizations, it's going to be the pointy end of the spear, as it's often said, this individual sailor or Marine, and so on. It's find out what that person needs. Because all too often, we've been thinking about analytics as what, again, a few people in a back room need to think about, or what our executives need to think about in order to make a decision. And when they make that decision, it gets trickled down and communicated over the course of months or years. Whereas if we can provide what the individual person who is responsible for operational dominance, if we can make that person aware of what needs to happen and make better decisions aligned with some kind of a goal, then that's going to make a difference right now as far as being able to achieve the objectives of the organization. So for me, it's really about focusing on the right people, not what data you currently have, not what data you might be able to get, but what do those individual people need in order to achieve their mission most effectively, and then work backwards from there to define a strategy that's going to bring that data together in a way that's coherent for them and for the people who support them, the executives and so on down the chain.
Jake, Mike, thanks both very much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
We'll be right back with commentary from Daniel Snyder of Bloomberg Government.
Entrepreneurial Government is brought to you in part by Information Builders. Actionable analytics, trusted data for information builders. Learn more at IBI.com.